Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a literal 19th century medical mystery to see how one radical shift in perspective absolutely birthed modern therapy. Picture this, it's 1892, and doctors are completely baffled by a wave of bizarre physical symptoms sweeping through their clinics. Nobody knows what's going on. We're going to look at how a young Sigmund Freud stepped in and completely turned the medical world upside down to solve it.
Okay, so let's start with this fascinating question, because understanding how invisible thoughts can create very visible, very real physical symptoms is the key to our whole journey today. Just imagine walking into a doctor's office with a paralyzed arm, or maybe severe tremors, right? And eventually you discover that there is absolutely nothing physically wrong with your nerves or your muscles. Zero. So how does a thought or a memory literally possess the power to shut down the physical body?
To guide us through this massive puzzle, we're relying on an incredible narration by the Iranian psychotherapist and psychoanalyst Shahyad Sabet. He provides this brilliant framing of Sigmund Freud's early work on hysteria, expertly breaking down exactly how Freud managed to look way past the surface-level symptoms and solve a mystery that had honestly stumped the greatest medical minds of his era.
Part 1. The Mystery of Hysteria and Investigating the Grande Attack.
To really appreciate Freud's breakthrough, we first have to look at the medical status quo. Back then, this hugely influential French neurologist named Jean-Martin Charcot basically ran the show. He took a strictly neurological view of these mysterious symptoms, classifying what he called the Grande Attack hysterica into 4 very rigid, purely physical stages. He meticulously categorized the convulsions and the delirium, mapping them out like a purely mechanical failure of the human body.
But here's where the paradigm shift happens, and it's so interesting. Charcot merely described the physical glitches. He was just taking notes on the symptoms without ever really understanding the root cause. Freud, on the other hand, looked at the exact same patients and suspected there were psychological ghosts in the machine. He believed Charcot's rigid classifications didn't truly explain the psychological meaning behind the attacks. Freud didn't just want to describe the bodily symptoms, he wanted to uncover the hidden mental processes driving them.
Which brings us to Part 2, Unlocking the Hidden Mind, the Hypnotic Clue, and the Second State.
To find those psychological ghosts, Freud and his colleague Joseph Breuer began questioning their patients while they were under hypnosis. And what they found? It led to a massive breakthrough regarding how human consciousness actually works. They discovered a splitting of consciousness, which we now call dissociation. Basically, deeply emotional experiences can become entirely separated from our ordinary, day-to-day awareness. They get hidden away, sure, but they don't disappear. They continue to exist in an unconscious state, a second state of consciousness, just waiting to return.
And this brilliantly illustrates how these memories get hidden away in the first place. It happens through a mechanism Freud identified as repression. Think about it. When we experience things that generate intense guilt or anxiety, like, say, holding on to forbidden romantic desires within a highly rigid moral system, we try to exclude those threatening thoughts from our ordinary waking mind. We repress them. We push them down into the dark. But as Freud discovered, the emotional energy of those repressed wishes definitely doesn't just evaporate.
The absolutely crucial takeaway is this. A symptom like violent trembling or a sudden inability to breathe isn't some random neurological glitch. Freud realized that the attack actually represents the return of a memory. The body is physically acting out a terrifying, highly emotional experience that the conscious mind absolutely refuses to look at. The physical symptom is literally functioning as a living memory. The body is doing the remembering when the mind just can't.
Let's move to Part 3, Trauma and Repression Explained, the Scale of Emotional Injury.
You see, Freud realized that the trigger for these living memories wasn't always a massive macro trauma. It wasn't always a train crash or a soldier experiencing overwhelming combat terror that just bypasses conscious processing entirely. He gradually expanded his whole concept of trauma. He observed that hysteria was just as often caused by accumulated micro-trauma. We're talking a death by 1,000 cuts from years of chronic fear, persistent disappointment, or prolonged emotional suppression. Shahyad Sabet's narration gives us this tragic but incredibly illuminating example to explain this accumulation. Imagine a young woman raised in a very strict social environment where any expression of anger or sexuality is strictly forbidden. For years, she quietly swallows her humiliation and represses her desires. Eventually, those unresolved emotional conflicts build up so much pressure that they literally force the body to scream for attention.
She begins suffering from sudden fainting attacks, which Freud viewed as symbolic physical expressions of all that suppressed psychological suffering.
Which leads perfectly into part 4, the emotional pressure cooker. The mechanics of emotional excitation.
To really grasp Freud's early theory here, you kind of have to think of the human nervous system as a literal pressure cooker. It desperately needs to maintain a stable level of excitation, or emotional pressure. If you experience something intense, you have to safely release steam from that cooker. You do this through healthy ordinary outlets, thought processing, talking to someone, crying, or taking purposeful action. These are your everyday psychological safety valves.
But what happens when those safety valves get jammed? What if a person experiences profound grief, but they can't or just aren't allowed to cry or speak about it openly? Well, the emotional reaction gets suppressed entirely. Months later, that trapped emotional steam just blows out the sides of the pot. It emerges as unexplained physical pain, breathing difficulties, or paralysis. Ultimately, the body steps in to physically express the exact thing the mind was unable to process consciously.
And this completely redefines trauma for the modern age. Trauma isn't just about the severity of the event itself. It's actually defined by the nervous system's inability to process it. Trauma is any emotional experience that lacks an adequate outlet for discharge. If the emotion cannot be processed through ordinary mental or behavioral means, it becomes pathogenic. Basically, it makes you sick.
So let's wrap up with part 5, the birth of psychoanalysis and a new view of the mind-body connection.
By proving that hysteria was a disorder of memory and unprocessed emotion rather than just bad neurology, Freud laid the absolute bedrock for modern therapy. Foundational concepts like repression, the unconscious mind, dissociation, psychological trauma, and the whole idea that our physical symptoms hold deep symbolic meaning were all born from this 1892 paradigm shift. And while his theories would obviously evolve over time, this single early framework permanently transformed how we understand the deep, unbreakable connection between our hidden suffering and our physical health.
As we finish up this incredible journey through Shahyad Sabet's narration of Freud's early work, I really want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to ponder about your own mind and body. If our physical symptoms can actually function as living memories of unprocessed pain, what unresolved emotions might your body still be remembering? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the mysteries of the mind.